Afternoon, guys. It is about time that we get to do this. It's been a long time since we've all been in a room together, so welcome back. Hopefully this is the first of many and we don't get back to the last couple of years. So appreciate you guys having some patience with us as well over the course of since the season's end to now, and figuring out that we had some time to reflect, time to debate, discuss, have honest conversations. So between Steve, myself, and Josiah, have spent a lot of time meeting over the course of these last 2 weeks. Shouldn't come as no surprise to anybody that, you know, when you finish a season the way we did, it's with disappointment, it's with frustration, and it's also a time to reflect and look in the mirror. And everybody needs to do that, from the whole basketball operations department, starting with me as the leader. We have to look and say, okay, what went wrong? How could we fix it? What do we come across as, and how do we change things? Whether that's the vision, whether that is as simple as the roster construction, whether it's from Steve's standpoint, you know, how we coach the games and how we prepared for the games, and what we need, where are our holes, and we're all going to try and figure out the rest of this summer, you know, doing a very deep dive into what that looks like. And we can promise the fans out there and the organization that we'll be doing everything we possibly can to get back and focus, to be quite frank, on putting a winning team out there. I think there's been far too much debate, discussion, scuttlebutt, whatever you want to call it, about distractions and about things that really are outside of basketball, whereas we'd like to focus on doing some of the things that got us here in the first place and help build Brooklyn. And that's focusing on the grit, the resilience, and putting a team together that encompasses that, and the borough of Brooklyn can be proud of, and that's going to be the objective, whether that's through the coming free agency and draft, and all the way up back. We have a lot of decisions to make, you know, and I'm sure you guys will get into all of that, and we'll focus on that as we get through. But again, appreciate your guys' time today. Before we get into questions, just want to send our condolences to the family of Bob Lanier, as the NBA lost one of the all-time greats today. So with that, fire away.
The expounded on the reflection that you were speaking of a moment ago, what did that reveal in terms of the combination of things that led to an early playoff exit, that you and the franchise look in the mirror and say, this is what we would like to adjust based off what we saw?
Yeah, you know, I think that's it's going to be a long-winded answer to that one, because to be quite frank, there's a lot of things, and I touched on it before. It starts with roster construction. It starts with our preparation. It starts with the summertime. You know, we have prided ourselves on the past with finding players with a chip on their shoulder, with a resilience, with something to prove. We're going to have to go back to that. We're going to have to go back to looking a little bit more at development, looking more at finding the right characteristics of a player that fits here. You know, as long as we have the roster of returning players that we have, I think our goal remains the same. Our goal is going to be, for the foreseeable future, to be the last team standing. So there's a lot of questions that both Steve and myself and the rest of the organization have to look in the mirror and ask each other, you know, was that the right decision? And at the time, was it the right decision? Could we have done something slightly different? And, you know, we'll see how that plays out over the next, you know, 3 or 4 months. And that's a long time to think about it. So I don't think that I know Steve never had 5 months in an off season to think about this, but I'm not trying to make light of it. But, you know, that's a long time, you know, to really do some deep soul searching and think about, like, what we can change.
Hey, Sean, you guys were just, you know, the idea of potentially having Ben play, you know, that Game 4 was discussed. Obviously, he was ruled out of that, but then he underwent back surgery the following week. Can you just kind of walk through how he was getting to a place where he could potentially play, to then have to undergo surgery, you know, whatever it was last week?
Yeah, you know, I think Ben had a tricky build-up, to be quite frank. You know, he got here and there was a setback, obviously, as he went through his ramp-up, and we saw him on the court. We saw him, you know, participating in 3-on-3 and 5-on-5 games with the Stay Ready group, and we were hoping that, just like Ben was, hoping he was going to be out there. And I think he was hoping more than anybody that he could come out and contribute for the team. You know, we've had lengthy discussions about how much he can contribute and how much really he means to our roster. There's a gaping hole, and he fits, some needs that we've talked about in the past. So, it was followed up by, it got too much, and we had another follow-up MRI, and we could see that the herniation had expanded, and at that point, there was really nothing but surgery that was going to fix this. So I can tell you that in the communications I've had with him multiple times since the surgery, he's feeling relief already, feeling great, and he knows that, again, goes back to that 5 months. He's got a big build-up ahead of him to get ready and really contribute.
Sean, going back to your earlier comment, I mean, when you first got here, you talked a lot about the culture, and you also said, hey, the culture is never finished. Yep. It's a constant process, assessing it, building it, and so forth. Is it fair to say then, in your mind, that that culture was moving forward and may have taken a step back and then has to be tweaked and corrected? And if so, did you guys lean perhaps too hard into player empowerment? Is that part of what eroded some of the culture?
Yeah, great question, Brian. I think, as I've said before, your culture's never done. Even after our first 2 years here, to think, oh, great, we've got this player-friendly, team-friendly culture of resilience, grit, and so forth, finding guys with chips on their shoulder. If we had rested at that, it would have been a failure, right? So you've got to keep building it as we go along, and with a different makeup of teams. Our team is going to look vastly different every single year. It has to, if you look at our financials and how we're, when you have two guys who are signed up long-term to max contracts, that, leaves you, pretty limited on your financial resources and assets to continue to build with. So it's going to be a slight bit of a revolving circle down there, and we've got to draft right. Our group has shown that we can draft right. Our player development guys have shown that they've developed players. So the culture is always going to change and tweak as to who comes in here. Did we take a step back? Without a doubt. Without a doubt, the culture isn't what it quite was, and it's going to be our job, to pick that up. And between Steve and myself as leaders of that, we will certainly be doing that. But again, we've got to find the players again that are going to drive that culture. It has to be driven by players. It cannot be driven by one or two people. It's got to be driven by the players. They've got to want it. We've got to find players, again, that have the characteristics that support that, which is going to be a little bit of that grit and determination and fight. Now, you mentioned the player empowerment. I think that's a little bit of a misnomer there, where people think, well, player empowerment means you just let them do whatever they want to do. I mean, that wasn't the case when Steve was a player. It certainly wasn't the case when I was a player on any of the teams we've been on. It's not the case here. I think involving players in key decisions and the right decisions at particular points in the season is the right way to do it. There's nothing worse than having players surprised by something. You want to feel that they're a part of this. You want to feel that's the way we run our organization here. That's the way I've run it since 2016. We collaborate. We're together from top to bottom, from ownership all the way through. And I'm going to have everybody's opinion. I think it's valuable. It doesn't mean we're always going to agree. We're not. That's the fun part of this, is the disagree and commit when you leave here. And the same goes to the players. I want them to know that they're part of this. And Steve will do the same when he talks to the players about whether it's a particular play or what have you, get their thoughts, defensive schemes, whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, the buck stops here and here.
I guess I should follow up on a little bit. When the season ended, Kevin said, can't regret, stuff happens. But I kind of feel like that would be sort of how to describe last season, where two guys get injured in a playoff series. You can't prepare for that. But it seemed like the stuff that derailed you guys this year was some individual decisions and personality choices. Do you feel like there's a difference? Do you feel like the stuff that happened to you guys this year was stuff you could have prevented? And if so, is there a little more disappointment than the way things worked out?
Without a doubt, there's more disappointment for sure. I think last year we look at it, it was an ankle, it was a hamstring, a size 18, whatever you want to call it that. But this year's tough. We've certainly got to get back to the drawing board here a little bit, and that's the best way I can say it. I think the longer we have time to reflect on it, and Kevin has time to reflect on it, and the rest of our players as well, they'll realize, hey, we can all look in the mirror and we can all do things that probably could have pushed the team a little bit more. And some honestly, it's decisions I've made. So I've got to go back and again back to that drawing board, as I said before, and see where our focus, what focus should be for not only this summer but moving forward.
Hey, Sean. Obviously, the cap situation that you had brought up, how much, I guess, financial leeway do you have to make those signings using the exceptions that you have, considering what will happen with the luxury tax? Do you have, I guess, freedom or leeway to make those moves, or are you kind of going to be hamstrung by that?
You're always hamstrung to a certain extent. I will say this, with our partner and Joe, he has been amazing to us. As you've seen over the course of his ownership the last couple of years, he has given us autonomy. He has been in the room with us. Again, we collaborate with him. And, he knows what's at stake here. He wants to bring something special to Brooklyn. That's been his objective all the way. It's get back to those winning. The objective is to win. He's made it very clear that's what we want to do, and he has never said no. And if the decision is the right one, and we think going forward it doesn't hamstring us, long term, I have no problem going to Joe and saying this is the decision we need to do. Whether it's trading a player, signing a player, using exceptions like you pointed out.
And one more for Steve. As it pertains to Ben, assuming that he is on the roster moving forward, just do you see him as the point guard for this team or as a 4? And how does that kind of influence your offseason?
I think he plays both. I think the game's become pretty positionless. I think his assets on the floor are varied. So I think he's going to handle the ball, initiate offense, and particularly in transition, he's an incredible playmaker. But we have the luxury that Ben can also be a roller, a playmaker out of the pick and roll. He's just such a well-rounded and versatile athlete and skilled 6'10" player that I think it would be limiting to say, hey, you got to handle the ball all the time. You have to facilitate the offense all the time. I think that's what's special about him is the varied skills he brings to the table. So yes, he will facilitate and be the point guard. He will also sometimes be the center. Other times he'll be a guy that's just playing positionless basketball, trying to create offense in the half court. So I think for me, it's playing to his strengths, which are varied, and all those things are a part of it.
Sean, hey. Kyrie told us several times in the last couple months he wants to be here long term. Is the organization committed to Kyrie long term?
Yeah, look, I think that's something we've been discussing, and we will continue to debrief on and discuss throughout this offseason. And it's honestly not just Kyrie. I mean, you bring Kyrie up, but we have decisions to make on a variety of different free agents throughout our roster. We haven't had any of those discussions yet, so it'd be unfair for me to comment on how it looks with us and Kyrie, because to be quite frank, he has some decisions to make on his own. So he has to look at what he's going to do with his player option and so forth like that. But I think we know what we're looking for. We're looking for guys that want to come in here, be part of something bigger than themselves, play selfless, play team basketball, and be available. And that goes not only for Kyrie, but for everybody here.
And just to follow up on that, specific to Kyrie, given what's happened the last couple of years, is the organization confident that he is going to be out there night after night after night?
Yeah, again, those are the discussions that we'll have to have with Kyrie in person and take it from there. But again, those discussions haven't happened yet. I don't want to comment on hypotheticals and what may happen and what but we'll wait and see, and hopefully sooner or later that we're having those discussions. I did make the mistake last year that you guys have all sort of brought up to me a couple of times, that I said we would sign a couple of guys, and that didn't come to fruition. So I'm going to hold back on telling you that I'm going to sign these guys until it happens, and that goes for all free agents. So we'll just wait, and at the appropriate time we'll make those decisions.
Just to follow up on that, I was going to ask about Kyrie as well. Do you feel, Sean, it's necessary to specifically say to him, if we're trying to get away from distractions and put all the time and energy on the basketball part of it, that going forward, absences have to be injury-related only, and that personal sabbaticals, personal choices, mandate-related reasons are just not good enough anymore? Is that something you have to directly say to him to go forward with him as a star player on this team?
I think those are going to be discussions. It's a team sport, and you need everybody out there on the court. And we saw this year, when you have Kevin missed 27 games with injuries, and Kyrie being out for over half the season. I mean, that hurts. That hurts from a roster building standpoint. That's not what we planned for. So some are avoidable, and other excuses are of individual nature, and those are the ones that we have to try and avoid. We need people here that want to be here. They're selfless. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves, and there's an objective and there's a goal at stake here. And in order to do that, we're going to need availability from everybody.
Hey, for Sean and Steve, this is probably a question for Kyrie too, but I didn't get a chance to ask him. Everybody's probably has an opinion on this, but for you guys, you've had some time to kind of decompress. How much did his absence earlier on the season and then coming back for road games and then being back full-time late in the season, how much did that have an impact on the final result for you guys?
Well, I'll touch on it and I'll let Steve talk about from a obviously playing standpoint. I think it's obvious whenever you have a key part of your team that's not available, and you're trying to build chemistry, you're trying to build camaraderie out on the court, that's very difficult. And then you have people coming in at certain times of the season. We mentioned before that we made what we felt was the correct decision at that particular time to say, hey, we're not going to have Kyrie around, and we're going to go off and continue to build and continue to play. And then as you saw, the load that was putting on not only Kevin but our other players, and then you have a Joe Harris injury and so forth, then it becomes almost unfair to players, and you're asking them to take on too much. So then again, the decision was tweaked, what was best for the team at that particular time to come back in. But, there was no script. There was no, we weren't going off of something that's been written before. So it made it difficult for all of us. Again, I don't want to make any excuses on that, because I think there were a variety of teams out there, and the teams that are still playing to this day, they may not have had quite the extent of the excuses that we could come up with. But again, they had to navigate COVID as well. They had to navigate injuries. They had to navigate all of this. And if I'm going to be brutally honest, they navigated it better than we did.
I don't know if Steve was going to weigh in on that. Sean, you talked about some of your options with the roster. You have that first-round pick for this year. I think you have about 3 weeks to decide if you want to keep it or punt it. I mean, just what are you kind of weighing as you decide whether or not to hold it or push it to 2023?
Well, great. I mean, Steve and I just left the draft book out. The guys are in the other room right now. So, we are going through as if we're trying to find somebody for this roster, for this team that can help us move forward with. So, if we find a group that we think is going to be there, then we'll keep the pick. And that's what we're planning on right now. But we'll see. This is the fun time of year for the front office, and to have these discussions with the coaches when they're out there and they're evaluating and they're scouting, these young men and seeing who could potentially, don a Nets uniform next year.
For Sean or for Steve, you guys had a significant-sized rookie class last year. They kind of had a truncated summer. How significant is this summer to have them for the whole couple of months and kind of figure out what you have there and get their development going?
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge summer for our young guys. I think they all got a taste of the NBA this year. I think they all proved that they can play in this league, but it's really important for them to double down this summer, make sure they get every inch out of this extra time to put themselves in a position to come into camp and earn minutes and prove that they're rotation players. So opportunities abound, and I think we've been very clear with them about the opportunities and what's at stake here and how important this summer is for them.
Got one question for each of you guys, starting with you, Sean. Just the way you guys lost in the first round in terms of Boston's physicality, how much does that influence the way you build the roster this offseason?
It certainly does. I would be pretty naive if I thought, we could just sort of run it back, right? I think we can see not only where the NBA is going, but potentially how defenses are now set up to guard the likes of Kevin, Kai, and those sort of max players. So we're going to have to put the right pieces around them, and that starts in free agency now, but it also starts with our own guys. And as Steve alluded to before, this summer is big. I mean, when guys are in the gym already, working out, we're expecting big summers from them, and they're expecting big summers from themselves because there's going to be opportunities to be had. So whether that's in the weight room and working on their game out there, hopefully we see several of those guys take another leap.
Gotcha. And for Steve, I mean, we spoke about this before, how just having 10 new guys at the beginning of the season, then James, well, Kyrie going down, James getting traded, Kevin getting hurt, it just hampers your ability to install an offense that's complicated or complex. What, I guess, is your vision for the offense? What do you see it looking like? Because at times it looked like, sometimes you get ISO heavy with Kevin and Kai, and that got everybody else stagnant.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for us to look at everything we do. We went out of the playoffs last year, without Kyrie, without James, and are an inch from beating the NBA champs. And so it's hard to evaluate going into a new season what to change. You come back and obviously things are different. James is in a different state after his hamstring. Kyrie opts out, and so trying to get to a continuity and a way of playing became very difficult for us. But this allows us an opportunity to look at it under duress. Regardless of who's available, how do we want to play? And I wasn't happy with the way we played. I think Boston's a unique team. They're going to switch. They're going to take everyone out of actions. I think you see it with Milwaukee, just trying to get their best players to get downhill and make plays. That's why Boston's terrific defensively. So it gives us an opportunity to look at the top level defensively. How do we want to play? How do we want to attack? Where do we need to grow and improve? And, I don't think any of us loved the way we played and want to improve. So this is an opportunity for us to look deeper at how that can come to fruition, how we can put together a style of play that regardless of the continuity, regardless of availability, we feel what we learned over the last year or two puts us in a position to be better, to play better, to take those lessons and to put them onto the court and in good use. So that's really, for me, the big theme is that we have an opportunity here to look closely at ourselves and how we can improve and not make excuses. There's plenty of excuses, but they don't get you anywhere unless you really look in the mirror and figure out what you learned from them, how you can get better.
Sean, do you worry at all that with Kyrie and Ben, you have a roster with a couple guys who have not played when they are healthy, and how that can affect you going forward? And if you do negotiate a contract with Kyrie this summer, do you worry it's a challenge for you? You have to sort of gauge someone's beyond how good they are at basketball. You have to gauge how much they're committed to playing for how many years that contract is.
Yeah, 100%. We have to factor all of that in. When you're honestly where we are, when you're giving somebody a minimum contract and it doesn't pan out, it still factors into how you're building a roster and how much tax you're paying and so forth. So certainly when you're looking at players that are making $30 or $40 million or potentially making that, you have to factor in everything, and that's the hard part of the business, right? We can all see what they can do on the court. It's one thing when you're evaluating players, whether it's at the college level or at the pros, like what makes them tick, what goes into what drives them. Do they want to be part of this? Are they motivated by something that maybe that's not good for the whole team here? So those are questions we're going to have to ask ourselves and also ask the players that we want to bring back in here.
Hey, Sean. Good to see you again. Regarding the Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving era so far, two-part question. What have you thought of what they've brought, one, in terms of the culture to the team that maybe has been different than in the past, maybe the Kenny Atkinson era, and two, the overall production in terms of where you're trying to get to be a championship team? I mean, obviously you haven't gotten there yet, but in terms of those two things, what have the two of them brought thus far in this era of the two of them together?
Yeah, well, I think I might have even mentioned to you before, Mike, I think Kevin Durant is our best player development coach. Like, if you watch him and how he competes in practice and how he competes in shoot-arounds, everything is game speed. Just follow him. I mean, I can imagine when I was a 19, 20-year-old kid, having the opportunity to, play alongside or shoot in the same drill as a guy like Kevin or Kai, and you see that they go at game speed and you see how they want to master their craft. That's pretty special. And look, I'm not taking anything away from any coaches, but, what they do out there to get themselves prepared and to be at an elite level is, so that I think that's different. Obviously, we didn't have that, prior to this, and they're competitive. I mean, they want to be the best. I can speak for Kevin. I've had multiple conversations with him, about his legacy and competing at the highest level here. So, having that competitive edge that they come in with on a nightly basis, I think that's something we all take and learn from, in terms of that culture, that how it perhaps has changed.
Steve, going back when you were a player, I'm sure after a tough playoff series loss, it's back in the gym, focusing on things that you can improve upon. I'm sure there's similarities as a coach too, and I'm curious, after the playoff exit, even though it's still rather fresh, what is the reflections in the mirror revealed in terms of, what you would like to improve, and how much fuel did the loss add to your fire?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in the office every day since we lost, so I think it's been plenty of motivation to take a deep look at what we do. We've definitely experienced more than the average group. So how can we use that to our advantage going forward? You're navigating a lot of these scenarios for the first time. There is no blueprint. A lot of people historically haven't been through some of this stuff. So how can you use that not only as fuel, like you said, but also as a way to form a blueprint, as a way to look deeper at our processes, as a way to reimagine how we do things and to preempt scenarios that we have seen over the last couple of years. So, I think that's been, in some ways, the fuel has been exciting to say, look, we can get better in so many ways that were unforeseen. Like I said, coming out of last season where, we're toe on the line from beating the NBA champs without, two of our top guys or James in a pretty tough state with his hamstring. It was difficult to really think other than, hey, we just need guys healthy. And you could fall into the same trap this year. Say, well, if Ben and Joe play, there's our size, rebounding, defense, shooting that we were missing. But that, I think, is foolhardy. I think it's important for us to take the opportunity to grow and to look deeply at what we do and what really matters to us and where we want to hang our hat and what are our big rocks and how do we want to get there. And so that I think is the process that we've already started to undertake. Really looking at not only the decisions we made, the things we went through, but how we want to, go through our processes next year to, one, be better, but two, preempt some of the things that went against us and put ourselves in a position to survive or to handle patches of the season that may be more adverse than others in a more positive way. So definitely a lot of fuel, a lot of debate, as Sean said, a lot of, really deep dives into all the things we do. So I think that is something that is such a, through disappointment is a gift and an opportunity. And I think that's the approach we have to have.
This was one for each of you. I mean, both of you guys have discussed defenses and how kind of defenses are going in the league. Steve, do you feel that you need to either A, tweak your defensive coaching, or B, hire a defensive coordinator as part of a new staff? And for Sean, I'm curious, obviously Ben Simmons could theoretically fit that mold, but what do you guys as a group, as an organization, have to do beyond the surgery to help him get on the floor and stay on the floor, whether that's physically or whether that's mentally and emotionally?
You want to start?
Yeah, I think Ben's a big part of our defense. So, and Joe Harris, I think we were exceptionally small, against a big team. So it gets exposed. We're playing 5 guys that are 6'3" and under against a team that really doesn't play anyone that size at all. So, that can give you limitations defensively. I think we always look for new ways. I think the hardest thing for us in many ways is just the continuity piece to how do you really evaluate where you want to go defensively, because it looks so different when you play with a bigger group on the floor than when you play 2 or 3 6'2", 6'3" guys out there. So that some of those things are on the one hand you expect not to face again. On the other hand, it's an opportunity to look at what if we were in that position again? How would we resolve some of these things? What could we make more adjustments? I think for us, we debated adjustments every day, but it's tough when a group's played 9 games together to make big adjustments. They haven't done these things on the fly. We did try to play some zone. We tried to blitz. We do different things. But I think for us, it's like, how can we approach the season in a way where we preempt, like I said, a lot of these decisions and adjustments where we can get through a lot of that early in the season so that we know where we're at and we know that if things do go sideways with availability, we have optionality or more optionality. And And so those are all things that we have months now to discuss, debate, to get to a deeper level of a process that is like I said, has more functionality depending on who is available and how we want to play and how deep our adjustments can go, knowing that we could be caught in a position where this group might not play that many games together. So what are the ways that we can get to a position where we feel more comfortable, having that functionality?
Yeah, regarding Ben, I think post-surgery now, I don't want to speak for him, but I can sense there's a relief. There's a new lease on life, so to speak. I mean, when you're able to take a problem and say, all right, that should be fixed and move that over here, and now it's on to the rest, right? So your question is, how do we support him, through the mental performance side of things? And, I think that's a touchy subject, right? I don't want to talk about somebody's mental health or mental performance. I'm going to let Ben address that at the correct time. I will say this, whether it's the NBA or whether it's what everybody's been going through, and I look around this room, I'd love to raise a hand, like any one of you guys out there, including Steve and I, who haven't had some type of mental fatigue over the last 2 years. This has not been easy for anybody. Now, I'm not making an excuse for anybody in the pro sports area, but this is something where we all need support, and we're coming through it, and it's the same for Ben. And so we're going to be doing everything we possibly can to get him around our group. That is the key. He needs to be in here, smell the gym again, around his friends, around his family, to be quite frank, and participate in this, and let us help him, build the culture together, build up together, build him up, build him back up, because as Steve alluded to, he's a big, big part of this. He fits a lot of holes, plugs a lot of holes that we think we potentially have, and with him in there, it's a different dynamic out there. It's a different dynamic for not only his teammates, what they'll be asked to do in the roles that they'll have to cover, but also for the coaching staff, as so they can put people in places where they were honestly brought here to do, and not have to try and fill a different role.
Sean, you mentioned the conversations are always ongoing with Kevin and how important he is to this team. As you've talked to him in the last few weeks, do you still get the sense that he views Kyrie as that foundational piece that he wants to move forward with in the next few years here?
Yeah, I actually have not had that conversation with Kevin. Not lately. I mean, this is not something that he is trying to get away and to sort of decompress from this season. I know it took a toll on him for sure, both physically and probably mentally too. So, again, I mentioned before, at the right time, talking to key stakeholders. Yeah, I mean, obviously, Joe, myself, Steve, Kevin, we'll all be talking about, whatever free agent comes in here. That's how that all works. But at the end of the day, I mean, more often than not, it's myself making those decisions. And, it's not me going to Kevin saying, do you want this person? Do you want that person? Who do you want back? I don't think that's fair to place that on Kevin. Now, is he surprised by anything? Absolutely not, because he will know ahead of time what we're doing and what we plan on doing with, to be honest, the entire roster.
And on a broader note, we've touched on it a few times today, but do you have any regrets in bringing Kyrie back and upsetting the rhythm that the team had going up to that point?
It's a cliche, and I hate to use it, but, hindsight's always 50-50, right? You always go back, or 2020, and you go back and say, well, what if, right? I don't want to use those what ifs, right? I think when you have a player of Kyrie's caliber, you try and figure out, how do we get him in the mix, and how long can we get him in the mix for? Because the team was built, around saying, well, Kyrie and Kevin are going to be available. And when those two are available, or James is available, or James is not available through a hamstring, or Ben is not available, then that adds a pretty big wrench into what you're trying to do and how you're doing it here. So for me to sit back and go, well, do I regret bringing a player of his caliber back? No.
Hey, Sean. The bunch of small guys trying to box out bigger guys in the playoffs, that came up during the Boston series. But beyond that, you had 4 centers who pretty much only played center. When you're watching some of these other teams that basically playing positionless, interchangeable lineups, 5 guys who can kind of play in whatever combination, how much of a priority is that when kind of looking at what you can do to build the roster going forward?
Well, as Steve alluded to before, positionless basketball, right? And that's another cliche. You'd love people who are versatile. You'd love people who play multiple positions and so forth. I think we look at some of the teams that are playing now. I mean, they've got 16 point guards out there. They've got, Golden State has I don't want to knock Draymond, but what is he, 6'7" center. So, I mean, there's a variety of people. I mean, you've got to weigh up how versatile they are, the IQ, and then build your team around that. Like we know, several members of our team who we have coming back. So now it's the pieces, okay, well, who fits with whom, whether it's in the free agent class, the draft class, or our current guys bringing them back here, and how they fit with what Steve wants to put out on the court and the system that he's going to run.
Sean, you've obviously had 3 stars on the roster the last 2 seasons. Is it possible, as you try to get the roster and culture back to where you want it to be, that you would consider a better alternative being a 2-star model with more supplemental players involved? Is that an option you'll consider this summer? And if not, why not?
I don't know that we consider it right now this summer. I mean, I think you have to play the cards you're dealt. And, when you have, we had built something over the, first 4 or 5 years here where it was an attractive place. Brooklyn is an attractive place for star players to come. I mean, it's a big market. And obviously right now people are going to want to play. They're going to want to come here and play with the likes of Kevin. I mean, he's an attractive audience for them. So, will we tweak it and go in a different direction? I'd be foolish to say yes or no to that because things, you just never know. I mean, 3 years ago, I couldn't have predicted that Kevin and Kai were going to say, hey, we want to sign up and play in Brooklyn. So you just never know what's happened. We wouldn't have been able to predict that James Harden would have come about, Obviously, we knew we were moving James to a certain extent, but you just never know what's around the corner. And come July, things could look quite different or things could look, a little bit similar. What I can tell you that will look different is how we approach it and the processes that are involved here. Some of the players obviously will look different. It always does. But how we approach and who we bring in here, the characteristics of the players, that will probably change.
All right, for both of you guys, as you look back on this whole thing, did you see anything that you guys organizationally or coaching staff or anything could have done differently for James Harden to have him want to be here, or was that entirely James just deciding to go elsewhere?
Well, I mean, I can start on that one. It's a two-way street. Whenever you bring a player in here to any organization or anybody for that matter, not even a player, and it's not a fit, you have to look in the mirror and you have to say, okay, what could we have done differently? The onboarding piece is easy, right? Everybody can say, hey, look, come here, I can sell this, that, and that. It's the offboarding piece. That's where you've got to make sure, well, why? Did I debrief on this? Did I really debate? Did I really do everything I could? Did we as an organization do everything we could for not only James, for everybody that comes through those doors? So it's a good point for us to reflect on it. But again, I think when players' minds are made up and James's mind is made up, I think it's also foolish to try and change their minds to that extent too. Like, if it's not a fit and you're paying a guy $30+ million and it doesn't work, you have to make a decision. And, I think that's something that we did. We pivoted quickly, moved, and we weren't stuck trying to figure out decisions and what could have been and what, it's time to move on from that perspective.
I think Sean kind of said it, it was obviously an unfortunate situation. I mean, it's easy to look back and say we could have done this, that, or the other, but, it was, it all kind of happened quickly. It came in and we had a lot of success when we were healthy with them. And this year it just all seemed to go the other way. So to be able to say why is equally as difficult as to preemptively avoid those scenarios sometimes. So I think it'd be in a sense foolish for me to go back and say how we would have done things differently because a lot of it was unforeseen. By the end, it just didn't work out and unraveled. And I don't know that a lot of it you could plan ahead for. It just happened.
Sean, you guys were able to have fans back in the building for the full season this year. How important was it for the organization to reconnect with the fan base in that way and get that support through the year?
Absolutely incredible. You guys have all been in Barclays. You know what it sounds like, and you know the energy that's in that building. And to have, to be quite frank, to be here 6 years and to see sort of where it's come and to see it continue to grow and to see a fan base that continues to grow. I mean, not only in Barclays, but our group travels pretty well. So it's inspiring. It motivates our players without a doubt. You hear them talk about it all the time. You hear about how excited they are. They hear those Brooklyn chants. And I think this was the first year I've mentioned it before, I'd ever been to MSG and heard a Brooklyn chant in MSG. I mean, we've heard it, on the road, and that's a credit to our fan base. Now, we let them down this year. So we have to go back to the drawing board and make them proud, make the borough of Brooklyn proud, and we're going to need them just like anything. I mean, I think it's a credit to what Joe and Clara have done for the Brooklyn Borough and all the little things they've done outside of just the Nets. This is a legacy play for them as well, and they want to do something that's lasting in here. And so it's our job to make that happen on the court and to give the fans something they can be certainly proud of. Thank you, guys.